Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. Today we're going to get a perspective from international strategic expert, a great friend of mine, and a wonderful personality, and always happy. So without delay, let us welcome Sri Abhijit Adi Mitra.
Thanks for having me.
Abhijit, the I think the American foreign policy makers have noticed how Indian army pushed back China. I do not know the inside story, you know more. And just for political science students who may be interested in that information, so what is your view on that?
So basically, what's happened we fought a war with China in 62. And even before that, what they used to do was salami slicing, right? They'll send their troops in, get a thin sliver of territory, and what had already been ceded, say the previous summer, they would build permanent installations there because, like, uh, you know, um, facts on the ground tend to alter political equations from the Israel Palestine conflict as well. So then what would happen is the next summer, they would advance even more. And what they had tentatively grabbed the previous year, they'd again build permanent structures out there and so on and so forth. And that has been continuing for a very long time. For whatever reason, it stopped sometime around April 2013. So from April 2013 to November 2019, there was absolutely no motion, no movement. But then around, we think around end November, but definitely by December 2019, what they started doing was they did what they always do, which is start to build tentative non permanent structures on territory they had effectively controlled, uh, at least since 2013. Uh, in some cases, even more territory that they'd effectively controlled since 1998. And we didn't let them do that. So it's actually the first time we've managed to push them back on salami slicing. And that's very, very important because before, what we used to do was we just used to cave, stand our ground, and give back what had been ceded, even temporarily. This time, they had to move back from what they had seemingly temporarily got uh, for almost a few years. It wasn't a year on year slow annexation, it was a multi year annexation that they've had to admit now is not under permanent control. And so they've moved back to positions that basically they've where they've constructed permanent structures. And the last permanent structures we've seen in certain areas are around 2006 and some in late 2012.
So one of the questions which was asked to me by one of the students was that did Indian army was wise enough, or the Indian negotiators wise enough to give up the commanding heights that they got on the South Bank? What
Look,
is
these commanding heights business, it's old thing. It's a very ground centric point of view where you hold commanding heights. Commanding heights come at a great cost. The cost of supplying them is enormous. The cost of maintaining them is in winter is terrible, because remember, these peaks are easily about 5-6,000 feet higher, and you're already looking at about an average battleground of 15,000 feet. So when it gets to be minus 20 degrees Celsius, so what's that in Fahrenheit, Adi? Uh,
it's around 32 below Fahrenheit.
yeah, minus 32 Fahrenheit in the plains, it goes up to minus 40 Fahrenheit, minus 40, minus 50 Fahrenheit, up 5-6,000 feet higher. The human cost is terrible. The human deaths during attrition is terrible, right? That said, amazingly, we have not withdrawn. We held on to them the entire winter, and we've still not withdrawn from those heights. I personally think we should, because there are much better ways of controlling those heights than, effectively sacrificing our troops. But anyway, we haven't withdrawn.
So one of the so American, I mean, there is a deep love for America at the for India at the ground level with Americans generally, for the yoga, dharma, and meditation and all these things. And the Indian gurus are extremely popular in the everywhere right now on social media, especially Sadhguru. Now, one of the things which came as a surprise to many Americans, because somehow it has been fed to the Americans, Indians are a non-martial race and they easily go down to pressure. And but this time they stood up. What changed this time?
What changed this time, I think, was basic understanding of China at a governmental level. See, there are two layers out here. This isn't the first big victory we've scored against them. We did it at Doklam as well in 2016, 17, sometime during that period, where we stopped them from constructing in disputed, on their own territory, in fact, across the border from Bhutan. Now, the problem was what we achieved militarily on the ground, we squandered at the Wuhan summit between Modi and Xi Jinping later that year. My real worry right now is what we gain through negotiations and just holding still militarily. I don't want it squandered again at some bilateral meeting between the leaders. They always say that personal meetings between every 10 minutes of personal meetings between world leaders destroys 10 years worth of hard diplomacy on the ground. And that is what I really, really worry about. I don't want to see that happening, what happened at Doklam. The second part of yours, which was linking back to Dharma, sadly, that's true. It's been mentioned sort of anecdotally, not metaphorically, in the Hindu texts on how the incarnation Balarama kills off all the Kshatriyas. I think it's actually a metaphor for something realistic that happened, because India used to be a very violent, warlike society. We went this sort of kumbaya, let's hug each other, kiss each other, peace, love, brotherhood kind of place. But to be fair, it was like hoplite, like Greek hoplite warfare. You did not sack cities, you did not kill people. It was meant to be armies meeting out on the field. You had a very clear concept of dharma yuddha. You had to follow the laws of dharma in war, right? Otherwise, it was considered extremely bad form. And they were much more rigid and codified than Greek hoplite warfare in that sense. So, what happens here is between the metaphor and the reality, I think, yes, we have sort of demartialized as a society. I don't think uh, we have that sort of military mindset of looking back at our failures and correcting our past mistakes. And most of it has to do with this thing, this delusion of infallibility, that somehow pointing out a failure reduces the stature of a human being. I don't think so. I think pointing out failure only makes a human being bigger, because they can absorb that criticism and change it. But anyway, it is what it is.
I think you were referring to Parshuram.
Sorry, Parshuram, not Balarama.
Now,
Um,
so coming back to the another thing is the American foreign policy under Biden is so far supporting India in a big way, and I think they have gone against China much more harder, and 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 this is the only show we talk a little bit politics on our shows with you. So with the Biden has made some good policy, outlook against China and against Russia also, and against to some extent Pakistan also. So do you think that this has given confidence in the Indians' mind that the new administration might be friendly to India?
no, I've not seen anything worthwhile against Pakistan, number one. Number two, the whole point of balancing is that one ties up with three against two. All right. Or two and three tie up against number one. if you're trying to alienate both Russia and China together, it's clearly not going to work. I know Americans think it will because apparently Russian and Chinese differences are so deep. They're convinced, half of them are convinced, uh, 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 two and three will never get together. And the other half are convinced that two and three getting together won't matter. I'm afraid it will matter. But anyway, American policy is where it is. Third, I have not seen anything specific against China at all. And I want to keep stressing this because with Obama, we used to keep seeing his non decisions to take on China being touted by an adoring media as the best thing ever in the history of containing China. And that's absolute rubbish. All right. I can show you with maps how that wasn't the case. This so called Asian pivot, okay, it moved from the first island chain. It actually, instead of getting troops closer to China, it moved troops away from China. And it was, trumpeted around as the next best thing since, I don't know, hockey and noodles or whatever. So, no, I don't believe that. And I'm getting increasingly concerned by what Joe Biden is doing. One is decertifying the Houthis as terrorists, presumably a carrot to Iran. Now, that itself has huge problems, which we can devote another session to. But canceling the F-35s to the UAE, he still hasn't called up Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. I'm hearing a lot of nasty things about Saudi Arabia that they want to do but are not doing to Saudi Arabia at the moment, as if decertifying the Houthis wasn't bad enough. And mind you, these are Houthis that are sending in, to be fair, the Saudis are also bombing them, but the Houthis are also sending in drones and things like that into Saudi Arabia. So I'm not entirely convinced about Biden so far. Uh, he's going to have to work a lot harder. I'm not like CNN or MSNBC that every time Biden farts, I pretend that he's actually done the world a favor by producing uh, renewable green energy and has led the path in biogas production.
That's a very, very, very figuratively or very figuratively constructed a nice picture of his, according to. So, in the Indian policy makers, one of the threats to the American exporters come to be the Atmanirbhar Bharat. So, do you think it should be considered as a threat or an opportunity for Americans to improve their offerings first?
I don't think America needs to improve its offerings. The problem's on the Indian side. It's on the demand side. When you don't have the rule of law, when you have a capricious judiciary, where you have non existent business jurisprudence, or basically joke of business jurisprudence, economically illiterate judges, uh, uh, highly capricious regulatory mechanisms, rule by tax, levy, and cess, where the levies and cesses keep changing every year, and so you can never really plan long term on anything. Where you have a completely broken down law and order system, where people can keep rioting within 1.5 to 2 kilometers of parliament, of all the government offices and things like that. Nobody wants to come in, right? So it's for India to really improve its image and provide investor protection and things like that. Because right now I'm not seeing people. A lot of people are going to Vietnam. Nobody seems to be coming to India. Let's see. I'm not the government's done a bit, but it needs to do a lot more.
So, one of the things was Arjun Mk1A being given to the Indian Army. Arjun Mk1A is of the same weight class as Abrams, 68 ton. Both are 68 tons. And Western philosophy is always to have heavier tanks, not the lighter tanks, because the lighter tanks defeat the whole purpose. There's a little distinction between armored personal carriers and a tank. So, what is your viewpoint on a MK1A program of India?
So here's the thing, with the Arjun, the first and most important thing is air conditioning. Do you know Indian tanks do not have air conditioning? All this crap we import from Russia does not have air conditioning. And when you're sitting in a desert where the temperature goes up to 52 degrees Celsius, that's what, about 114, 120 Fahrenheit in the desert. Imagine sitting in a metal box with no air conditioning. Can you imagine the erosion of human decision making and human response time that happens? Your brains are literally being poached.
Boiled.
Uh, uh, yeah, not boiled, poached. It's slow heating. It's sous videing the egg. You know, uh, um, yeah. So for all of you that watch Top Chef, you'll know what I'm talking about. So basically, you're having your soldiers' brains sous vide inside a tank. So one thing it does is this. The second, I'm not entirely convinced about the case against light tanks. Light, I don't mean uh, you can build a smaller tank with more confined spaces and still provide the same level of protection. The Japanese T10, for example, is a very good example of that. It's about 38 tons, but it's much smaller and it still provides the same level of protection. The main thing here is ground pressure. Its ground Arjun's ground pressure is quite low, so it can actually traverse. But then ground pressure doesn't matter when you're crossing bridges, for example, which have an absolute weight limit. There will be limitations out there, but that said, we've got a locally produced tank. Hurrah! Uh, I'm very happy about that. I'm happy about the air conditioning because for the first time in 70 years, we're actually looking after the soldier inside the tank. I'm happy. I'm generally quite happy with it.
No, it's one of the, it fared very well against T90 as well, and they so it fairly fared well against G90s in the trials also, desert trials. Now, in the case of like coming back to the Myanmar situation, because when I get your time, I want to ask all the questions. So, in the Myanmar situation, in the Indian Army released a pro-military statement because Indian Army is naturally happy with the Myanmar Army in controlling the northeastern rebels. But the Indian government released a anti-Myanmar statement. U.S. government released an anti-Myanmar statement. What is your view on that? Because of
We didn't release an anti Myanmar statement. If you actually read the statement very carefully, it says we expect a return to law and order and constitutional norms and so on and so forth. And the army is quite likes the Myanmar army, and I'll tell you why. Of all of China's neighbors, the only ones that have managed to screw the Chinese over multiple times historically, and that requires quite a bit of doing without any military force being used, are the Burmese. They really know how to play the Chinese, right? And China keeps falling for it over and over and over again. So Aung San Suu Kyi was anyway pro, you can't say pro India, but as pro India as you get. But the army is just as pro India. So I don't know why you have clowns in India saying that the army is somehow pro China and it's actually a Chinese takeover. It isn't. It's actually uh, Aung San Suu Kyi was kind of using the Chinese minority out there against the army in a very subtle kind of way, and the army's put an end to it. So no, it's all up. I'm never happy when a military junta takes over, but in sheer foreign policy terms, being cold and calculated, uh, as far as Burma goes, it's only pro India and even more pro India. There's no such thing as anti India out there.
so Africa is the new focus. Like I told my viewers, I'm going to ask all the questions here to Abhijit. If you want
We've
to
only
hear,
got 2 more minutes. Yeah.
two more, yes. Africa is the new focus from the world trade point of view. So, how will you do you think that India or America will ever cooperate or clash over Africa trade?
India's been doing a lot. Airtel is one of the largest mobile companies in a few countries in Africa. The issue is, will we ever get down to coordinating? Mostly all our efforts in Africa have not been because of the government, they've been in spite of the government by the Indian private sector. I'm hoping the newfound love that this government has for the private sector over the last month or so extends. We will really start making inroads in Africa and then start cooperating with America on it, when and only when India's bureaucracy and India's foreign bureaucracy, especially, is subordinated to Indian commercial interests. If they are not, it's not going to happen. And remember, Indian commercial interests are never predatory, unlike Chinese commercial interests. All Indian companies operating abroad have a certain CSR, they have a certain code of ethics and things like that that they like to follow. Even though it costs more, they do it, unlike Chinese corporations. So, yeah, all good.
Last question. I know you gave me just 2 minutes, but the last question here. So, Indian democracy has set a bigger example than American democracy. I saw one of your Facebook posts also on that. And so my question to you is: does America now need international poll observers, just like India also has international poll observers, and
It
America has never called for it?
it won't make a difference. I think there have been international observers in American polls. I'm sure they have. But no, I don't think it'll happen, because, like, what happened with this election was, if you read the Time magazine piece on this, all the fiddling that had to be done had been done a year and a half back. There were these slow petitions in counties and districts and all of that to change electoral laws to make them favor. So even if you'd landed up at the booth, I doubt very much you would have got much by way of electoral scamming and things like that. So it's done in a very different way in America. It's not your typical third world booth capture, stuffing the ballot and things like that. So, uh, and therein lies the weakness of the poll observer system, that it's still very much focused on the actual event, as opposed to when the manipulation before or after happens.
American democracy runs on contributions, not on votes.
It's
So,
true.
what is
I
your
think
comment on that?
Putin was the one who made that statement. But yeah.
So, thank you, Abhijit, and it's always a pleasure to have you. And people love you on our shows. So, thank you. And for viewers, if you have any questions, just text me. I'm going to ask him again. I'm going to call him more because you want him more, and I love him to have talk here. So,
Thank you
thank you,
guys.
Abhijit, as usual.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Aditya. Bye.